Good afternoon, folks. Thanks for your prompt attendance so far. We're just going to give a couple of minutes to see and give an opportunity for a few more to join. Thanks again for those that have joined. We'll just give another minute if that's okay. Thanks, everybody. I think we've got quite a number of people who have joined so far, and anybody else who's still in the lobby or waiting will join automatically. So firstly, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for giving up some of your time today to come and share with us and to hopefully learn from us. We're really going to keep today's session quite tight, practical, as promised, no fluff. We really just want to have some honest conversations. And to that end, we want to really, I guess, talk about what it is we're here to speak on today, which is that knowledge gap, and I guess why we just need to have that as a priority for us in our organisations. For those that I haven't met before, my name is Chris Borg. I'm from Customer Science, and joining me today we have Chris Duncan and Andrew Goodwin from LivePro and from Customer Science, respectively. And between the three of us, we spend a lot of our time talking to organisations. Even this morning, I was talking to a health organisation about some of their challenges, and knowledge came up as part of the precursor to this webinar. But the leaders that we talk to, the customers, experience teams, the service operation folks, the technology function people, these are the environments that we spend our days talking to, and that's what we want to start to share and impart some of that knowledge today. Before we begin, some quick housekeeping. So just to let you know that today's session is being recorded. Also that we would really encourage your interactivity. There's a Q&A section up in the menu bar. As you're going through, if there's any questions that you'd like to talk to, please fill in that Q&A section, and we will do our best to either answer them in the run, or we will keep some time for Q&A at the end as well. But with that, let's begin. So this session has been in the planning for a little while. Actually, I reflect back on a conversation that Chris and I had probably at the start of this year, where we started to talk about what are the challenges in organizations that he was seeing, that we were seeing, and what was the synergy. And I guess that it became really clear to us that this is actually not a technology gap, first and foremost. This is actually not a people gap. It's a knowledge gap. And we wanted to set that scene very early. I guess before we talk about what is knowledge and what does that mean. So knowledge is information that helps people do their job well. It's to answer questions, it's to provide guidance, it's your IP in your organizations. And I can see that we're joined by a real range of folks in different positions, in different organizations today as well. And we really want to talk about the fact that there is a commonality to this gap. As we think about it, organizations, you know this, right? We're not telling you something that you haven't experienced, that you don't know yourselves, that you don't see in and around your organization every day. But what is it? How does that work? What's that why question? How do your organizations function if there's an acknowledgement that knowledge has a gap? And the answer to that is people. People have found ways to make this work, whether it's talking to a colleague, whether it's part of your training process to sit and partner with people, Whether you've got the cheat sheets saved to your desktop, we have found ways as humans to deal with knowledge gaps, and to get the job done. And you know what? That's not going to change. We see people as the cornerstone to knowledge, even in an AI world. Why are we here then? Why is that so important? And why did AI, as our title says, make it urgent? When we start to think about AI, those tribal knowledge elements, the workarounds, the cheat sheets, the lived experiences, those things disappear. It really becomes the responsibility of the organization to understand its knowledge, to curate that knowledge, and to provide that knowledge to technology to be able to both assist your clients, but also to assist your team members. We know that we can't just depend on AI to make this knowledge and make it available. It needs to be fed, it needs to be curated, and it needs to be coordinated. And that's some of the truths that we're here to talk about today. So, what are we thinking? How are we going to run today? Look, I'd just like to give you a really quick flight plan. My role in this session is to really lean in to Chris and to Andrew, their lived experiences, and for us as a community to benefit. So what we want to do is walk you through some scenarios today that we hear and see frequently. The first is an organization that has no formal knowledge. They get things done, but they do it through lived experiences, as we talked about. They do it through the cheat sheets and the capabilities that are inherent in that customer. The second is an organization that's recognized knowledge is important. They might even have some repositories, SharePoint, Google Drives, OneDrives, but have they really embraced knowledge, and do they prioritize it? Thirdly, are those organizations that have good systems in place. They've thought about it, they've got some governance and some practice, but how is it being used to build the DNA of that organization every day? And I guess that's why we want to start to invite you to participate in today's session. We're going to start with a poll, and I'd really be keen to hear and see what you in your organizations are feeling when it comes to how you think about knowledge management today. So hopefully you've seen a poll on the screen, and I'd invite you all to come and start to answer that. For myself, this is an honesty moment, and Andrew is in the room as my colleague, but the reality is I would say that we have a ways to go even in customer science today. That's the truth. That's what we're here to talk about and to share. Just wanted to confirm whether that poll is working for you, Andrew.
I've got it from my side, Chris.
Yeah, fantastic. We're starting to see some results come in. It's actually quite evenly spread across people who are saying that they've got some really good structure, but it's hard to maintain, right through to actually organizations that are quite mature in their governance and the way that they're managing their knowledge, which is fantastic. Look, it's at this point in time that I really do want to introduce the stars of our show today, and that's going to be Chris and Andrew. Chris, we might start with you. So talking about knowledge, talking about what we've just seen in this poll today, how do you see and what are the conversations that you hear on a daily basis when it comes to people, organizations and their knowledge?
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. And again, just like to reiterate, thanks for everyone's time. Hopefully the 33% of this poll of our knowledge practice is mature. I can see a lot of LivePro customers on the call, so thanks for joining. So I'll put a lot of you down to that. Look, it is pleasantly surprising, and it to see such a small number in terms of the first response, in terms of no formal approach. Knowledge lives in people's heads. Surprisingly, there is still organizations, small and large, that we speak to, that don't have their knowledge in place, that don't really have any governance in place, that like to talk about their desires to use AI, which we'll obviously come to later on. But yeah, look, we can't shy away from it. The majority of conversations we are having right now are AI, and AI within not just contact centers, but within organizations. A few of you may have seen the smart contact center best practice report that we delivered in each state recently, and that talks about, a lot of the presenters are talking about AI, but a lot of it all boiled down to having the governance and structure in place, and organizations. I think there was a great stat that was read, where only 3% of organizations feel their knowledge is ready for the web, so ready for AI, which was quite concerning. And there was a stat that I produced on stage from a governance perspective, as 50% of organizations don't have strict and the correct governance in place. And I can see on this call we've got people from insurance, superannuation, government, and if you were to segment the 67, take kind of myself, Chris and Andrew off, 64 organizations that don't have their 50% of those don't have their governance in place is quite alarming. So I think knowledge is definitely getting spoken about a lot more of, and it's getting the flowers it deserves. But I would say that is because of the rise of AI, and everyone wanted to kind of get involved. Andrew, I want to kind of pass
Thanks.
it over to
You really you raise a great point, Chris, and I think that those industries that are the regulated industries, some of whom you touched on, they have that importance, and so they may have those governance structures in place. And before we throw to Andrew, I'd just be interested in your take on the difference that you might see between having maturity and governance, and then the adoption, the using it, the prioritization of knowledge as an organizational, almost a pillar that I would say is, and it pains me to say it, but this is your IP. This is your special sauce. This is what drives your organization. So there's the frameworks and the governance, but could you maybe elaborate a little bit for our participants on adoption and best practices around that as well?
Yeah, and it probably falls back to you've probably, if you've been to a LivePro event, or you've seen us speak, or you've seen posts on LinkedIn, we always talk about purpose-built, governed knowledge management, and that's still very true to this day. I think what we're throwing in now is the term, kind of AI-ready knowledge management, moving away from just thinking of knowledge management as siloed to the contact center, being that single source of truth. And it doesn't matter if it's just kind of LivePro. If you use another knowledge management platform, great. That is designed to be your single source of truth. But please stop thinking of it as being siloed to the contact center. We need to start thinking organizational wide. Why, everyone inside that organization should have the ability to home in on that single source of truth for the answer. And it goes back to the whole purpose built versus non-purpose built. And I know that we've seen from the poll, a lot of you aren't sitting in that lower category, but there's still so many organizations that are using your SharePoint, your Confluences, which SharePoint's document storage, Confluence, Genesis, Salesforce, great tools in their own merit, but they add a knowledge bolt on, which is not purpose built governed. So I think as we look at governance, and as we want to grow from an organization, and we want to start doing things like pushing knowledge to the website, pushing it out to chatbots, using generative AI, using AI talk bots, allowing customers to self-serve, which is very, very, very simple. If you're not using purpose-built governed knowledge management with the governance in place, it's not going to work. AI is going to home in on that, and it's just gonna quickly identify the errors, and it's gonna just kind of chuck out errors at speed. So I think having that governance in place is key, but there are so many organizations that don't, and that's where the likes of Customer Science, LivePro, and your KMS provider will certainly be able to come in and obviously offer that advice.
Thanks, Chris. Andrew, as I bring you into the conversation, I guess I'd like to hear your insights. We talk about knowledge gaps and where things might be hidden, but let's focus on the gap piece first. What are you seeing from a more technology-focused lens, but also business practice? And I know that you're working with some large institutions at the moment to help them identify their gaps. What are some of the things that you're seeing? And then we'll lead into maybe how people can take those practical experiences for themselves as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think I started working in contact centers and technology services organizations 30 odd years ago. And, the way I think about knowledge and how we used to do things all those many years ago versus today, the opportunities to leverage technology, of which AI is a piece, but it's not the answer unto itself. I think what interests me most is the use case of AI to assess large amounts of data and find things that previously we just could not do purely because it's too expensive. So if you imagine, the 35% or 16 people who say they have mature, actively governed knowledge, what would be fascinating for me is to take your interactions and the content or what's spoken about in those interactions or typed if they're chat or email, and compare those interactions to the knowledge that exists in your platform, be it LivePro or elsewhere, and determine if that knowledge is accurate. Is that knowledge conflicting with what the agent or your AI agent was saying? Is it contradicting, are there articles that contradict each other? So the point being there that AI is offering the ability to assess data and use data at scale and highlight things. What AI isn't doing is solving the problem, as I was saying, unto itself. It's highlighting these gaps in knowledge. It's highlighting interactions that occurred where a knowledge article kind of answered the issue at hand, the intent of the interaction, but maybe missed 5 or 10%, or the interaction was dealing with something that didn't even exist in the knowledge base, or in a regulated environment, it's dealing with some legislation that's changed and hasn't been updated, and that's obviously a bit of a governance risk, to say the least. And the knowledge gap piece, what we find, back to your question, Chris, was that organizations don't necessarily have a view of the knowledge gaps because it's not something we historically understand or even are aware of. We don't QA every single interaction with the intention of saying, did the knowledge article answer what happened during this interaction? Which is something we can now do at scale. And we can do it time and time again, and we can do it very, very well. So I think this is a new opportunity with the technology that we now have at hand, which is, at least from my mind, quite amazing.
Thanks, Andrew. And I guess it's a really good segue into what we wanted to discuss next, which is that notion of, so if there's a gap and we can acknowledge that there's a gap and we can think about how do we bridge that gap? How do we start to identify knowledge? And your point about comparing that knowledge to what we actually need and what's being asked for is really critical. It's that closing the loop on the knowledge cycle piece. So our next topic that we'd like to cover is, I guess, there's elements of this knowledge that remains hidden, and why? Why is that knowledge hidden from us? Is it things that we don't, as organizations, know that we know, or know that we don't know? What are the scenarios, Chris, and I'm going to bring to you first? Is it knowledge is being lost through length of tenure? I was at an event this morning and I heard somebody talk about a real push for them in their organization. In the contact center, they were seeing a turnover rate of 35% per annum. And that was just hurting every part of their business, notwithstanding knowledge and the training piece that you would have to go through to fix that. But what are the gaps? How do we measure how do we curate, how do we improve our knowledge once we've got those frameworks in place? And like you, Chris, I was surprised to see, pleasantly surprised, the number of organizations that have the framework. How do we make sure it's the right knowledge in those frameworks? Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of, yeah, we can talk about attrition, and we've known, and it's certainly something we preach and have done and will continue to from a long time when speaking to an organization from knowledge from a new perspective, or even an existing customer that's looking to branch knowledge into a new department. It's not a light bulb. You don't just put everything in, turn it on and walk away and wash my hands and come back to it six months later and it's still going to look, because it's the whole garbage in, garbage out approach, which we talk about, when we talk about AI, in terms of knowledge does need to be kept up to date. That's why we have things like review dates. We have workflows where if not everyone can go in and publish knowledge. It's only designed to do via specific people within the organization. Even things like marketing or third party organizations look after the website, but the knowledge inside the knowledge base, for example the contact center, is completely different to the knowledge that's on the website. We see so many times, there's so many examples where the top 10 questions or top 20 most frequently asked questions on the website, if you were to take that into the organization, i.e. the contact center, they'd be like, we get 3 of those. They're completely different because it's looked after by a different department, which is where we then preach, well, why not push the knowledge within your single source of truth out to the website to allow customers, not just to allow customers to self-serve, but we can silo off from strict governance knowledge that is internal and that is public facing. So we're not having to invite marketing in as part of that governance plan. I think a lot of it boils down to knowledge is thrown into an organization, it's given to one single person or a team of people. People move around, and then it starts to fall over. And if it's not kind of identified early, then it just spirals, and that's where I think we do lose knowledge and gaps. Going back to Andrew's point, there are tools now that can help with that, in terms of tools that we can use to leverage AI to get knowledge into the system to help with the writing and identifying knowledge that's in the current not atmosphere, we're not talking about space, the current system, kind of what's been duplicated or what's missing. So I just think it goes back to having that strict protocols in place, and with certain, you reference it then, Chris, with certain organizations like insurance and superannuation that change at the drop of an instance. You need to be that change needs to be done. It needs to be pushed out, kind of straight away, because the last thing you want is a legislation or something changing on Tuesday the 9th of June at 12:24, and then agents are still kind of giving the wrong information on Tuesday the 9th of June at 12:28. It needs to be instant. So and you're only gonna be able to do that with purpose-built tools.
I think that's a great point, Chris, and this is my personal observation. I'm happy to be corrected by both of you, and the audience, by the way. Let us know in the Q&A if you think that Chris is completely wrong. What I see in enterprise in particular, but organizations, those big changes, Chris, that you talk about, a legislation change, that's imposed priority. That's where we as a community, whether we're insurance or whether we're in BFSI, like the financial institutions, or whether we're in health, we are seeing an external invitation come to us and say, by this time you need to do this. What I'm keen to understand and unpick, and Andrew, I'm going to come to you, is the knowledge that's my knowledge. I offered up that we as customer science, we know the practice, we have the technology available, but there's still areas of growth in myself, in my practice, and what I do for knowledge. How do we, and what are you seeing around organizations pushing this from an internal out, rather than those scenarios necessarily that's coming from a regulatory body or something pushing in. So Andrew, what do you see around that?
Look, I think this is the whole sort of taking what's hidden and making it visible to the many is something that I can remember talking about decades ago, and I think every organization wants the same. It's they want to institutionalize the knowledge and bring the knowledge from the few to the many. And I don't think this has changed for at least my experience anyway, which is quite a while. I think what is interesting now is our ability to do this in a way that hasn't been done before. I also think, before I sort of get into that, what's important to recognize is the implication of hidden knowledge. And often organizations kind of know that the knowledge is not sort of institutionalized. It's not there. There's bits. Humans are really, really good at retaining knowledge and finding workarounds. Experienced agents perform well for a reason. The team leaders sort of sit above that, and the senior leaders hopefully know one level above there. But how does that manifest for everyone else? It's longer handle times, it's more escalations, it's the inconsistency in answers, which, as you move to regulatory environments is, not where you want to be. And it's the rework. And all of that ultimately is cost. All of that comes down to spending more time. It comes down to spending more money on servicing customers and making customers happy and giving them a good experience. It's all of this knowledge conversation today for me is about improving customer experience, and the side effect is also reducing cost, which is a good thing. So to your point, Chris, about what organizations are seeing, I think organizations are trying to do this. I don't see organizations doing much more than going to their chat GPTs and Claudes and trying to find a magical answer. Unfortunately, unicorns do not exist, and you need to be a little bit more, dare I say, programmatic in the approach here. It needs to be systematic. It needs to be a case of defining the way in which we uncover the hidden knowledge and then deciding as humans what the correct answers are, and leveraging the technology and the platforms like LivePro with the governance baked in to get that knowledge no longer to be hidden, to be surfaced, to be institutionalized, for improving customer experience, because for me that's what it's about.
Thanks, Andrew. We're going to move to another poll, and we're going to ask you to give your input about your organization's strategic priority on knowledge. As I do that, I'm going to ask a little bit of a provocative, or make a provocative statement, and it's from a conversation I had this morning. So I was chatting to a lady who's a senior leader of service teams inside a health organization, large, multinational. And I asked her the question, why does knowledge stay hidden? And her blunt response to me, without even thinking, knowledge is power. And she said there's fractions inside her organization that is really, we can talk about the people, we can talk about the workarounds, but she said until you get that organizational priority to make this number one, that in her organization, that was going to continue to be a challenge. And so with that, how serious is your organization about knowledge management as a strategic priority? Just give it a couple of seconds for people to think and answer. So far, the number one response, with about 40%, is that it's a stated priority, but it's inconsistent in its execution. And I think that's probably where I would have anticipated it to be. I think organizations recognize this. The conversations that Chris and Andrew have been talking about today so far are really highlighting that. Yeah, wow. So we've nearly got 50% of people sitting at that execution inconsistence piece, which is probably the really great time for us to segue into AI, which is a focal point of what we wanted to talk about in today's session. And I think that there's often some pressure from above to think about the fact that we recognize this problem, but AI will be the fix of the problem. And I might start with you, Andrew, to talk about AI being the fix of the problem. I'm sure it's an enabler of the problem, but in our prep meeting that we had last week, thinking about today, we probably highlighted that humans are still the most important component of this, the strategy, the planning, and then the tools. But Andrew, with that in mind, thinking about the pressure that we hear and we see in the marketplace, you only have to go on LinkedIn and see vendors and thought leaders talking about AI as the answer to all of our prayers. What are you seeing in practice, Andrew?
Look, I think there's two sides to this. One is, yes, organizational pressure and also resistance. I think the two sort of go hand in hand. There's definitely a push for organizations to leverage AI to be better, to be faster, to be more efficient, and find that advantage and improve customer experience. But then there's also the pushback around what do we do, and that's why a lot of AI is sort of what we used to sort of talk in technology terms as shadow IT. People are using their desktops to do things rather than governed platforms, which has risks unto itself. I think the issue with AI is that people think AI is the answer, and it's not. AI is an enabler, as you said, Chris, but it's the mechanisms that sit under it. It's the ability to get an answer that is going to be correct, most if not always, and consistent. It's not about saying, large language model, please give me an answer, and it sounds amazing. And then unfortunately, we become reliant on those answers. And then sooner or later, we forget to critically think about what it's telling us, which is a real problem, especially in regulated environments. Because these AI tools use what's called RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, and it's not truth. It's simply a mechanism to retrieve data. The truth lies somewhere between that and the human and the processes and procedures that exist in between that. So I think the answer here has to be yes, use technology, because if you're not using technology to solve this problem, you're going to be using humans. It's going to cost you a lot more, and it's going to be inconsistent because humans are also inconsistent. But B, if you're using technology, it needs to be done in a way that doesn't blindly trust the technology. You as the human, you as the organization who knows what's best for your organization, needs to leverage these tools and make the decisions. I think asking AI or asking platforms to surface suggestions is the right approach, rather than say, please try and solve all my problems for me. And then to finish, I think the most important part of all of that is the governance piece off the back, is your knowledge platform saying, right, we've had some suggestions, we've leveraged technology to help find solutions to these problems, to uncover gaps, to close them, to make knowledge better, all of those great, wonderful things. Humans signed off, made the decision, and then we have the governance workflows. And that's, for me, how we get to first-class knowledge. It's all of those things combined.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I guess that's what we're all struggling with, if we're honest. How do we map out and then execute? So, Chris, I'm sure you've heard it 1,000 times. Surely Gen AI solves this. What's LivePro's perspective and your personal perspective? What are you seeing in the data points?
I'm a 90s baby, and I feel like there was more pressure to drink and smoke than there is now with AI. I feel like AI is thrown in your face. Like you said, every time you open LinkedIn, it's there. Yeah, I feel like there's more pressure now to use AI than there were when I was growing up, to give into those temptations. Look, AI is not going to come in and fix everything. We certainly don't see it to replace people. How I see it, and I think I can speak kind of clearly for the team at LivePro. We see use AI to allow the humans, the people inside the organizations to have more time on those more complex, and I'm just relating from a contact center lens, from those more complex issues. So let AI handle the simple stuff, in terms of if a customer's calling up and asking what cancellation periods are, what time does something open, how do I set up a new account, how do I transfer my superannuation. AI can handle that. We can allow and we can trust AI to handle that, as long as we've given the AI the clear guidelines. And there was a quote from a report that the smart guys kind of read, what it said: guardrails and foundations need to be put in place first, governance first, AI second. And that, for me, when I presented it on stage, was in each state, that could have been my Obama mic drop moment, where I just said that, walked off the stage. We've got 24 minutes left of this. I'm done. That's all I need. That's all I need to say. So, yeah, the key driver, that AI is not going to come in and fix kind of the world. It's not going to come in and take people's jobs. I think we need to be careful with how we use AI, but if we have the guardrails in place, I don't think we need to be scared of it. I think all organizations, when you ask, would be conflicted in terms of, yes, we're using it, and I think a lot of organizations probably haven't thought about the consequences, certainly ones that we've come across. Then you're going to get some of the organizations that are blindly just, no, I don't want to use AI, because there's probably a scared factor there as well. But look, I think the organizations that we speak to and the conversations we have is, of course, like, bring in AI, but make sure it's sits within value of the organization, and it's doing and it's serving you a purpose. It's doing what you want it to do, to help your organization.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. I do want to call out, there's a question in the Q&A that I'm going to weave into our next section in a couple of minutes. But just before we round that out, Andrew, you talked about RAG, and for those folks who aren't completely familiar with all of the terminology, because we want to make sure we're speaking the language that's common for everybody. And I think this is really the truth that talks about some of the challenges people are facing. It's about the knowledge that you have, that you trust, that you then place at the center of your AI strategy. Now, I've probably done that a very big disservice in terms of trying to articulate in common language. But Chris or Andrew, would you be happy to kind of just elaborate a little bit on that knowledge conversation from a RAG? And then I'd like to just quickly touch on, conscious of time, what that feeds in terms of opportunities for self-service and other things. So maybe Andrew to start.
Yeah. I think there's multiple answers to that, and I think Chris would have a different answer to me. But I think so. If you think about the source of truth, who is it the source of truth for? So a source of truth for agents should be your KMS, should be your LivePro. Your source of truth for your AI agents on your website should be your KMS. But what's the source of truth for your KMS? Because that's a different conversation. So for me, there are multiple layers here. So when we try to make knowledge better, and we're making knowledge within the KMS better, within LivePro better, our source of truth would be things like training materials, legislation, policies and procedures, product documentation, because that's the truth that then feeds into knowledge articles that answer specific questions that customers have. So, what we see in a lot of organizations is they throw a lot of this knowledge to the RAG without knowing it. And the really good example here is Microsoft Copilot. So a lot of organizations think that Microsoft Copilot's going to kind of solve world hunger for them. Unfortunately, it doesn't. It's a great product. But if you imagine you ask your Microsoft Copilot, what is, X for Y product, how does Copilot know which of your 10 versions of that file are accurate? How does it know to make the right decision for you? And unfortunately, if it's giving you a nice, coherent, formatted answer without the evidence, without the provenance of why it's made the decision, you are likely to, as a human, just accept that as truth. And if 4 or 5 people across your organization ask the same question and get 4 or 5 different answers, that's probably not a good outcome. And that's what will happen when you have very large document repositories. So I think, to your point, Chris, the source of truth is foundationally important from my perspective, but that source of truth depends on what the interface is.
Yeah, thank you. And Michael, before we specifically dive into your question as part of this next section, I am going to do our final poll. And this poll is the perfect segue, I think, into what we want to talk about around how we help and what we see with those challenges. So it's specifically asking that question, and I'm pretty sure I know Michael's answer already. How do we do this? There's the question around the technology piece, but there's also the question about the practice piece of knowledge. And I would think that many organizations are challenged in the sense of, how do we do this? How do we manage it? What are the practice knowledge questions, but also then the repository, the systematic way, and some of the platforms that have been mentioned today may not be in everybody's hands inside the entire organization. And so it's a really important question to ask. And the next part of what we'd like to talk about is to think about what good looks like. How are organizations that we've been working with overcome questions like the one that's been posed, which is, what is, how do we think about knowledge? How do we think about systems? Thinking about AI and AI adoption, one of the lead-ins that we talked about is that organizations, and we're seeing this in the statistics, both local and international surveys are talking about those pilots aren't either yielding the return that we had anticipated that they would yield, or alternatively, we're struggling to scale them across businesses. And it's that dichotomy of the question: is it a tech? Is it a business? Is it a process? Is it an understanding? Is it what's going to work for us? And so for the next 10 minutes or so, I'd really like us to unpack what we're seeing from organizations that are making good progress and how knowledge is at the center of that. And so, Chris, maybe again, thinking about some of the smart things that you have either seen in the research or some of the co-presenters, as well as what LivePro has seen, what can our audience take away from today, thinking about how they can, that's that nugget of gold that I'm going to take back and think about.
Yeah, I think the main one would be, and if we all, we can't get away from AI, it's around make sure the governance and structure is there first. I think that's just a given. So if you're going to take anything away, just make sure the governance is in place. In regards to the poll, it's nice to see so many organizations using purpose built, but there are going to be ones that are using the likes of CRM platforms, telephony platforms that have their own kind of knowledge bolt on, which some of the evidence that some of you I recognize were in the room at some of the states when we delivered them. So apologies for kind of ramming it down your throat twice, but there was this significant clear winner when it comes to organizations using purpose built versus other solutions, not just from a usage perspective, but more from an ease ease of administration. There was 0% that were dissatisfied when using purpose-built versus 30% were dissatisfied. 22% were very dissatisfied, which is the lowest score you could select from using other knowledge solutions. So the big question I asked on stage was, from a telephony point of view, I don't think there will be one organization in this room that would be able to tell you this is the telephony platform we use, and it would be the organization's second or bolt-on product. Likewise with a CRM, we go to best of breed, where I think that's what we haven't done in the past with knowledge, because it hasn't been seen as significant importance. But over the years we have seen it, the trend go up in terms of the importance of KMS. But now I think with the spike of AI, we've seen it incredibly spike, which is great for us at LivePro and other KMS providers. But Chris, we're going to answer Michael's question, because I've seen that and I've got some. Or we circle back that.
No, and this is. Please feel free. We'd love this to evolve. So Michael's question was specifically around, I guess, and I'm paraphrasing: is it system or is it practice? And I think the answer is both. But I'll let you kind of articulate that.
And I think he's touched on, you've got Dynamics, you've got Genesis, you've got SharePoint, you've got knowledge in all these different places, which again is a red flag in terms of not having that single source of truth. And how do we get the buy-in? Because that was my piece on stage. Well, we've seen the evidence. Purpose-built is a clear winner. Knowledge is very important. Governance is key. So why are we still allowing our people and our staff to use purpose-built tools? We're expecting them to deliver, going back to Andrew's point, great customer service and great customer experience, but we're giving them inferior tools, so it doesn't quite match up. But I think in kind of a response to your question, Michael, it's there are tools now that can take the knowledge from the organization wherever you've got it distributed and get it into that one single source of truth. And I think it only takes a quick demonstration to show that purpose-built knowledge, governed knowledge isn't just popping, kind of keywords and Word documents. It goes back to the structure, the governance of the document, the workflows, the authoring to it, allowing that to be pushed out to different systems. So I think to that, it's a conversation that needs to kind of happen from your side. But I think number one for you would be to get all of that knowledge pulled out of all those different systems and placed into one single source of truth.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Andrew, I guess thinking about it and focusing in on some of what you already touched on, the notion that Copilot isn't going to solve world hunger, but it is an important tool, and it's an enabler and it's an accelerator. But how would you answer that question, being a technologist but also a practitioner?
I think the sort of pragmatist in me, and I have, in years gone by, tried to implement knowledge platforms across a variety of types of organizations or departments within organizations. And dare I say, most of the time failed quite miserably. And one of the primary reasons for that is getting people to actually use the platforms is really hard. Getting people in an internal environment. I think when you're servicing external customers, there's a real need, and people are more on board, and we fund it. But internally, it's a bit more difficult. I kind of think the answer, as Chris said, you have to have a knowledge platform. The question for me is not, do you have to have a knowledge platform? I think that's yes. I think the bigger question for me is how you get knowledge into that platform when people in your organization are either actively, refusing to put knowledge into the platform or maintain it, or are buying in. And for me, that's where the technology solution of what exists today with AI and other pieces helps. It's a case of saying, all right, well, we've got this centralized knowledge platform that is our first class knowledge. How do we get the knowledge in there and keep it up to date? We do that by actually looking at the interactions that are occurring, and then looking and how people are asking questions. And we use that mechanism to get knowledge in and keep it up to date, which wasn't previously there. And I think, in a time gone by, a lot of organizations have invested in knowledge platforms and then had a sprawl, often SharePoint and other platforms, with senior leadership really wanting as a universal source of truth because they understand the value it brings. But the resourcing and mechanisms to extract that value has been quite difficult. So I think, where we are today from a technology standpoint, I believe at least solves a lot of this problem and allows organizations to use knowledge management platforms significantly better than previously they would have been able to.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I wish I had the capability, and I don't, to quickly create another poll, because I think that the question that would be really interesting to ask our audience is, who takes that ownership role in their organization of knowledge, and is there one person who could even be that owner? We come from a customer experience world, and we have chief customer officers, we have experienced teams, but more and more I'm seeing a need, but maybe a lack of resourcing towards knowledge. And I do believe that AI will be the reason that knowledge gets funded, because my personal belief is that it is the cornerstone of being able to really scale the technology pieces that we're all needing to do. There's an adage that talks about, all boats rise in the tide. And I think that we're seeing that, and organizations are choosing to adopt in different ways depending on their risk profile, their regulations, and other elements of their own business. But there's no question, all of the surveys, and I think, Chris, you shared with me last week that, and when I butchered the quotes, the percentages, you can correct them, but there was something like 90+% of organizations said that they were actively pursuing AI, but less than 5% from memory felt they were ready.
Yep.
And that's the reality. I guess what we want to just wrap the next couple of minutes around, and if there are any questions, please, we would really invite you to bring them in. I will have a couple of questions for folks as well to really get their perspectives. But what can organizations do? I think about this time when I went in a previous life to an institute. It was a higher education institution. We were doing a review of their knowledge platform. And in order to do that, we ran a report and we said, what's the #1 search term across all of your knowledge? And I think this is where Chris already mentioned, are the FAQs on the website anything close? And it was 327 was the most frequently searched term. And I confusingly asked that question as part of this interview with the senior leaders and the customer folks of this organization. One person smiled. And so I said to this lady, well, do you want to let us know what that is? She said, yep, it's how do you reset the password? All of her team knew the quickest way to knowledge was to search 327. That was the number that represented that article in their platform. And it highlighted to me that people will learn. Andrew already made the comment about adoption, but we need to find a way to make it worth their while. It's the what's in it for me. And in lieu of any questions from the audience, I'd really like to finish our time today to think about putting yourself in the consumer's perspective. Chris, we'll start with you, whether it's your customer's client, so one of those legal organizations, an insurance organization, a health organization, a member services. What's the end consumer's benefit, and what are the team members' benefits for having good, solid knowledge practices? So I'll start with you, and then Andrew, the same question.
Yeah, I think from a staff perspective, purpose-built versus you know, kind of document storage, those other knowledge solutions, it creates happy staff. If they're not frazzled, so to speak, at their job, they're able to deliver the great customer experience that we want, which keeps customers happy, keeps staff happy. But I know from putting myself in a customer, you know, shoes, if I have a question or a problem, I couldn't think of anything worse than calling a contact center. Just me personally, whether it's my age or I would rather solve the answer myself. I'll jump on the website or I'll open up the app and try and solve it myself. But there's so many organizations that don't have the ability to self-serve. Even jumping on someone's website and having a box that you can ask a question. That's what we expect of these days. We expect to open Google or Amazon or Siri. But for that to be in place, you need structured, governed knowledge as that single source of truth, so it can pull the answer from it. So yeah, I think it goes hand in hand. If you're giving your staff the tools to do the job, we wouldn't give them headsets that don't work and the sound's fuzzy. We'd replace Absolutely. It like that straight away. But why are we giving them tools that surface 5 different answers? Or, you know, I think there was something I said on stage, and I'll leave it. It wasn't my joke. It was someone else's joke. It was, where's the best place to hide a dead body? Inside a SharePoint. That was just, yeah, exactly. It got, granted everyone's on mute, but I guarantee you're all rolling back in your chairs laughing. But that's the response I got on stage, and I said, right, that went down well. I'm going to use it from now on. But yeah, I just think it balls back to purpose built versus non-purpose built for internal and external.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm a couple of decades older than Chris, without giving too much away. But I would share that same scenario. Wherever I can, I will look to self-serve. And I know that's, I read a stat recently that said it's actually the younger generation that's moving away from AI faster than any generation. And that's not because they're not ready to adopt. It's actually the inverse of that. They think that the organizations aren't ready to serve. And so your point is really well made. I think from a agent's perspective, from an internal team member's perspective, from an end consumer's perspective, if you don't do it well, you will lose that opportunity in terms of whether it's a benefit of real-time access or whether it's a benefit to adoption and enablement. Andrew, over to you.
Yeah, so you had the 2 questions, the benefit to the customer, benefit to the agent. Yeah, I think human nature is such that we would like to solve problems ourselves and not be reliant on others. That's sort of a crux of the human psyche, I think. So I think having, the benefit for customers is having the answers available, accurate answers available. I'm sure all of us have searched for answers on a customer's website or AI, which has scraped the website, and had inconsistent answers, out of date answers, and the frustration with that is pretty poor. So I think the benefit to the customer is all of the things that lead to better CX improvements because they're getting the right answers. And closing knowledge gaps helps you make sure those answers are available. I think for the agent, it's making their lives easier. It's making the new agents, lives easier and time to onboarding. I remember some time back we had the concept of a universal agent, and being able to cross skill and deal with multiple types of inquiries. Knowledge being the primary barrier to the sort of the unicorn of the universal agent. So I think the agent's life is ultimately going to get better. And I think finally, the one you missed, Chris, was the organization, because the organization, what do they get out of this? And for me, the organization gets a better brand, better customer retention, better CX. Ultimately, there's not a lot to lose from having better knowledge if that knowledge is driving cost efficiencies and higher customer satisfaction.
Andrew, thank you very much. And it was a really important omission. Thanks for picking that up. Folks, want to be really respectful of your time. So just in our last minute to round out, if I had to summarize, there is no one size fits all answer to this question. But there's people who really want to help. And I would invite you to connect with Andrew, with Chris, with each of our organizations to help understand where you're at in your cycle and how we can guide you, help you, assist you in terms of taking those next steps, whether it's scaling AI, whether it's what's the right tool for the right job, as my dad would have said. But thank you all for making time for us today. We really appreciate it. And if there's any follow-up, please feel free to reach out to customer science team and the LivePro team. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.